I'm soloing the main series Pokemon games with every species. I'm obsessed with this project because it's challenging to collect accurate data which relies on multiple playthroughs per Pokemon in order to have meaningful data analysis at the end of everything. In Yellow version alone, I've completed 29 playthroughs with first stage water types. I've learned that predicting their success is simple. It comes down to 4 critical factors that either make or break these runs. Today's challenge is beating Yellow version with only Staryu. Rules are in the description. To understand the water type success factors, I am going to have to break down Staryu as a Pokemon first, and then we're going to dive into some of my historical data. So for base stats, Staryu has 30 HP, 45 attack, 55 defense, 85 speed, and 70 special. In Generation 1, its critical hit rate is dependent on its base speed, so it's 16.41%. Staryu has a slow growth rate, and it is a mono water type. It gains the Psychic typing when it evolves to Starmie, which of course won't be happening today. But discussing evolution in this video is actually interesting because many of the stone evolutions in Generation 1 lose their level up learn set when they're evolved. I think Game Freak wanted you to feel like there was a trade-off between either leveling up the first stage Pokemon and then evolving later, or evolving earlier on to get good stats, but losing out on a lot of opportunities for good moves. And that is really the case for Staryu. This is Starmie's level up learn set in Generation 1. It just doesn't exist 3 starting moves and nothing else. Staryu, on the other hand, gets access to a bunch of other utility moves: Recover, Swift, Minimize, Light Screen, and Hydro Pump. Evasion boosting moves are banned in my challenge runs, so Minimize won't be useful today, but all of the other moves potentially could be. Through TM and HM, Staryu has access to so many great moves: Bubble Beam, Water Gun, Ice Beam, Blizzard, Thunderbolt, Thunder, Psychic, Thunder Wave, just in case, and finally Surf. With such fantastic coverage, what could possibly hold this thing back? Well, that's where we need to start talking about the success factors for water types. This is my tier list as it stands right now. I'm going to highlight all of the first stage water types that we're going to be comparing Staryu with in this video. The first success factor is the growth rate of the Pokemon. If we look at the outlier Poliwag, it has a medium slow growth rate, and so does Squirtle. This isn't a coincidence because they are the 2 highest ranked water types in the tier list, and they are the only 2 with the medium slow growth rate. By the way, there are 3 first stages omitted from this list: Psyduck, Slowpoke, and Staryu. I've already done Psyduck and Slowpoke playthroughs, but they happened so long ago I think their results are no longer valid. I'll be redoing them sometime in 2025. What that means, after Staryu is complete today, I will have finished all first stage water types in Yellow version. Okay, back to growth rates. You can see that there is a mix of the medium fast and the slow growth rate in the E, F, and Surge tiers. The higher placements within these tiers consist of Pokemon like Omanyte and Krabby, which have medium fast growth rates, and the very last spot is Shelder, which has a slow growth rate. Well, technically Magikarp, but it can't even complete the game. Unless I use X items, which is exactly what I did, and I managed to win when using the Dragon Rage Magikarp. Check out the video if you're curious. So amongst these first stages, why is a Pokemon like Tentacool ranked higher than a Pokemon like Shelder? Or why are Pokemon like Kabuto, Horsea, Goldeen, and Seel ranked below a Pokemon like Tentacool? And the answer to that question is the second success factor. What type of damage dealing move do these Pokemon have when they face Brock? The outliers Poliwag and Squirtle both have water type moves. Omanyte and Krabby, which are ranked ahead of Tentacool and Kabuto, have water type moves. But then once we get to the Jellyfish and the Fossil, we start running into Pokemon that only have normal type moves in order to defeat Brock. Tentacool is a special case with Wrap preventing Brock from being able to attack. Kabuto has a rock typing resisting Brock's normal type moves. And Horsea is just not very good, but for other reasons. Factor 3 largely plays into why it doesn't do particularly well. Goldeen has a flying type move, Peck, at the beginning of the game, and Seel has Headbutt. Shelder then has Tackle, which is a normal type move, and Magikarp gets Tackle at level 15. I should also mention that Krabby's special attack stat is very low, so even though it has Bubble, it's not really an advantage. And I think this factor is one reason it doesn't get out of the F tier and make it into the E tier. So considering these things, where would we predict that Staryu would be placed in the tier list? Well, it has a slow growth rate, and its starting move is Tackle. This suggests to me that unless factors 3 and 4 come to its rescue, it is not going to have success in this solo challenge. In Viridian Forest, I fight the mandatory Bugcatcher at level 8, and this is not enough to defeat him. His level 10 Caterpie defeats me, and I decided to take a Blackout, being teleported back to Viridian City. I'll just fight more trainers in the forest to gain more levels before I fight him again. I come back at level 9. This time things work out for me, although the fight is relatively close. But speaking of blackouts, I can use this mechanic to my advantage. If I ensure I spend all my money on items so I'm not losing anything, then I can battle the junior trainer inside of Brock's gym and defeat his Diglett for trainer boosted experience, losing to the following Sandshrew. I often get questions if this is more efficient than fighting wild Pokemon, and yes, it is much better. Sometimes Pokemon have access to a status move at this point in the game, like Tail Whip, that allows you to buy time against the Sandshrew so that it can knock you out and you can extend the amount of blackout training you can do. But with Staryu that is impossible because its only move is Tackle, so eventually I am just going to have enough damage and defeat his team. I have 6 blackouts here against the Sandshrew, so 7 in total for the playthrough, before I finally defeat his team, and now I need to think about an alternative way to train. There are 3 or 4 possibilities. The route just south of Pewter City, or the route west of Viridian City both have Pokemon that are decent to fight if you want attack stat experience. That isn't really the case for Staryu. Later on I'm going to want to have more special. To gain experience as fast as possible, the best way to do this is fighting Pokemon inside of Viridian Forest. This is a Pokemon Yellow exclusive because in Red and Blue the Pokemon are at lower levels, and there are Weedle which can inflict poison, dramatically slowing your results down. The 4th possibility is backtracking through Viridian Forest to fight the rival on Route 22. With most water types I like to do this because then the rival chooses Jolteon as his final ace. If you think this is weird and the Jolteon should be the hardest team for water types to face, I'm going to explain why it's easier later on. For now, it's relevant to say that I lost the lab battle, and if this happens, the rival is always going to choose Vaporeon, regardless of if you skip or win the battle on Route 22. Some people think if you win on Route 22 and lose in the lab, he chooses Flareon, but that isn't the case. All of this is a long-winded way of saying that I need to train in Viridian Forest. It's the only option. And with Staryu, I have the experience of playing Shelder to know that I am going to need to be level 17 in order to defeat Brock with Water Gun. It just doesn't make sense to try it with Tackle. I don't have enough health or damage to defeat both the Geodude and the Onix. It takes me a very long time, and finally at 23 minutes and 14 seconds, my Staryu learns Water Gun and I'm ready to face Brock. This battle is very anticlimactic. Water Gun just one-shots the Geodude and the following Onix. What else would you expect? Overtraining for Brock always gives Pokemon a little bit of momentum in the next section of the game. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that just inside of Mount Moon there is the TM for Water Gun, which is a very painful fact when I spent so much time learning this move naturally fighting wild Pokemon in Viridian Forest. In Mount Moon, I continue my training because I don't want to get walled off around Cerulean City. Sometimes that happens for water types like Omanyte, for example. The Oddish trainer right before Bill's house, who I call the Oddish Lass, completely destroyed it because Omanyte doesn't have access to a normal type move for coverage. And that is going to be the 3rd factor that differentiates these water types from each other. Do they have access to a move that covers their most threatening weaknesses? What's needed is a move that damages grass type Pokemon in the early game for at least neutral damage, and then in the late game at least decently manages the Magneton. It is ideal if you can one-hit, but normally that's not the case. We're going to wait a little bit to talk about how Staryu does against grass type Pokemon. For now, I need to make a decision. Do I want to fight the rival on Nugget Bridge or Misty first? Well, I was doing extra training in Mount Moon to ensure that I could go up against Misty initially so that I get access to Bubble Beam for the remainder of this portion of the game. It will greatly improve Staryu's speed along Nugget Bridge, where, if you didn't know, there is the highest density of mandatory trainers in the entire game. Inside the Cerulean City gym, I fight the mandatory trainer, and then I realized that I am about to level up to 22, so I backtrack and fight the swimmer as well. This just barely doesn't give me enough experience to level up, so I actually fight some wild Pokemon to do it, because at level 22, Staryu learns Harden. This move is really going to help against Misty. She has AI modification 3, meaning she is only going to use Tackle with Staryu or Tackle and Harden with Starmie. This is an advantage for me because against her weaker Pokemon, I can set up with Harden boosting my defense stat so that every turn Staryu takes less damage. This has an additional benefit because Brock's badge increases my attack stat by 12.5%, and in Generation 1, every time your Pokemon's stats are modified, the badge boosts compound on top of each other. So as I set up with Harden, you can watch my attack stat as it rises as well. My attack has gone from 43 up to 75, greatly improving the damage that Tackle deals, allowing me to 3-shot Misty's lead. Next is Starmy. Now she can use an X defend on it, which is annoying, and if she sets up too many turns with Harden, then I'll be doing less damage per hit. But it's not the end of the world, because if you get a critical hit, you bypass your beneficial stat changes, including badge boosts. This means even if I get a critical hit with Tackle, it's still going to be doing less damage than it would if I was just hitting with it regularly. If she sets up too many times, then I can switch to using Water Gun for special damage, which might do a little bit more. In the end, it doesn't matter, and while the Starmie does get some scary critical hits, doing a lot of damage, eventually Staryu emerges victorious on its first attempt. But is this really a victory? We are approaching the 30-minute mark and we just defeated the second gym leader. The prize for this is the TM for Bubble Beam, which I teach to Staryu in its one empty move slot. It's immediately put to use against the rival on Nugget Bridge. I one-shot the Spearow with a critical hit. It manages the Sandshrew with no issues. I probably could have just used Water Gun against it. Rattata does a little with Quick Attack, but it doesn't matter. That leads to Eevee, so his team is straightforward. While I do get hit by Sand Attack, luckily I don't miss. The trainers on Route 24 are sometimes a problem for Pokemon, but only if you don't have a special move. In this case with Staryu, I have more than enough PP and damage to manage all of their Pokemon, never getting hit by something like Sand Attack or Supersonic. The trainer that I'm really worried about in this area is the Oddish at the very end of the route. This is the perfect time to examine Staryu's damage ranges against Grass-type Pokemon. Initially, it seems when considering type effectiveness that Tackle would be doing more damage, but if we look at the top left and see the effective powers, Bubble Beam has 48, whereas Tackle has 35. And that leads to the stat comparison of attack and special. In this case, even with the badge boost from Brock's badge, Staryu still has more special, so Bubble Beam is going to be doing more damage against every Grass-type Pokemon, even though it's resisted. The definition in my mind for Factor 3 success on Water-type Pokemon is that they need a non-Water-type move that deals more damage than Bubble Beam to these Grass types. If you don't have that, while this lass isn't actually a problem in this case, you would need to take 4 times damage from Grass-type moves like Omanyte for her to be an issue. The real problematic trainer is still to come, just after Lieutenant Surge, who is, by the way, absolute trash. He never deserves any respect. Outside of Cerulean City, I fight the Bystander Rocket, who I also sometimes call Rocket Man. Maybe he should be called the Digging Rocket. By the way, he now has official art. Thanks to Serena Vale for putting this together, I think it is perfect. The shovel and the TM for Dig are nice tiny touches. Also, Machop looks incredibly sassy. Luckily today, none of his team members are an issue. On my way to Vermilion City, I have to face Sandy. I'm one-hitting her Pidgeys so they can't get off sand attacks. On the SSN, I grab the TM for Rest just to be safe for the late game. I do think this is going to be required, and if not strictly necessary, it's at least going to be the recommended play against the champion. I fight the Gentleman who has 2 fire types, he's easy experience, and he also gives me access to another rare candy, which are really important for slow growth rate Pokemon. After that, I crush the rival because Bubble Beam is still really good here. Now I want to note, after this battle, I just barely don't level up to 27. If you look at Staryu's speed, it's 63. Surge's Raichu has 65, so I decided to fight this Gentleman who has 2 Growlithe. They're easy to knock out, and this levels Staryu up to 27. I was hoping for 66 speed, but I only get 65. But this level also comes with another advantage, because I can now learn Recover. This move was fantastic when I played the game with Porygon about 2 years ago. I'm going to teach it in the place of Water Gun because there is no move reminder in Generation 1, so it's now or never. The SSN departs, and then I head into Surge's gym to face the 3rd gym leader. Okay, so I said Surge doesn't deserve respect, but sometimes he just gets lucky using Thunderbolt. He does not have good AI, so this is a chance event, and when it happens, it does enough damage to knock out Staryu in a single hit, giving me my first reset of the run. And he doesn't just do that, because in the second battle, he once again chooses Thunderbolt and knocks out my Staryu. Things don't look great here, because Bubble Beam is doing about a quarter in damage every turn. It looks like it's going to be a 4-hit, but it would be a mistake to overestimate Surge's abilities and backtrack here later into the game. Even if I do lose a couple times, the time lost resetting is going to be less than the time lost backtracking through the middle of the map after arriving in Celadon City. And typically Surge just uses things like Mega Punch and Growl and X Speed in the worst possible cases. In this case though, he goes for Mega Kick, which does massive damage to Staryu. My Water type survives on 2 hit points, uses Bubble Beam, and Surge is defeated. 3rd time's the charm. Now it's time for the wrapping last, the trainer that caused Starmie so many problems. When I think back to optimizing that playthrough, this is the battle that stands out in my mind. I was trying things like Rest, Thunderwave, and Bubble Beam to defeat her, or badge boosting with Harden in order for Tackle to have more damage than Bubble Beam against her grass types. The real problem here is the first Oddish can use Stun Spore, then the Bellsprout will choose Wrap because it's not going to prioritize Poison Powder or Sleep Powder, seeing that you already have a status condition. There are only two ways to win from that point on, the Wrap missing or Growth being the choice of Bellsprout, which is also bad because then Bubble Beam does less damage. Things can seriously spiral out of control, but Staryu has an advantage over Starmie because it knows Recover. You might think that Rest is the better choice so that you can heal Paralysis, increasing your speed to move first against the Bellsprout again, but that's not how Generation 1 works. Once you're paralyzed, your speed will never go back to its original value unless you use a move that modifies your speed stat, so some potential options would be getting hit by the enemy's Bubble Beam, which is not a possibility here, or choosing Agility, which is also not a possibility. With Staryu, you can see that I got paralyzed right away. This brings up another glitch, which is the fact every time the Bellsprout uses Growth, it triggers the Paralysis debuff again. My speed gets lowered all the way down to 1, but as long as I'm able to move occasionally, getting Recover off to continue the battle, I will eventually be able to knock out her Pokemon. This is extremely tedious. Like, it takes so long. But finally, at long last, I defeat her Bellsprout and proceed. Now, before we move on, I'm just going to bring up the tier list. The reason Horsey has a water type move to defeat Brock, but it's ranked lower than Pokemon that have normal type moves, is just because of these battles against grass types. In the early game, Horsey does not learn a normal type move until it reaches Lavender Town and gets access to the Swift TM. So it lacks Factor 3, and as a result, it doesn't have as much success. I would say that Staryu kind of has a solution for the grass type Pokemon. It's not a great one, and there are more coming up. After I defeat the Pokemaniac in Rock Tunnel, for example, there is this junior trainer who I call the Status Condition Junior Trainer. She has 2 grass types, an Oddish and a Bulbasaur. The reason she's difficult is sometimes she likes to use Sleep Powder with the Oddish, and the Bulbasaur does decent damage using Vine Whip, but neither of those things happen today. After that, I crush the Self-Destructing Hiker, finish off the last junior trainer in the cave who has an Oddish, luckily no problems, and with that I make my way into Lavender Town, and south of it to the guard tower where I pick up the TM for Swift, which yes, Staryu can learn. I'm gonna hold off on teaching it though because in just 3 levels, Staryu will learn this move naturally. It might have even been possible to skip the TM altogether. In Celadon City, I go into the Rocket Hideout to collect an additional rare candy, and then in the department store, after selling a bunch of items, I grab myself the fresh water and trade it for the TM for Ice Beam. This is where all water types now have good coverage against grass type Pokemon. So from here on out, the main threats for us are all the electric types, and that really boils down to being just the rival's Magneton, which is one of the primary antagonists of all of these solo challenges. Staryu is starting to run into an issue here. It has Bubble Beam, Ice Beam, Harden, and Recover, 4 very useful moves throughout the playthrough. Deleting Harden would be very short-sighted because I'm going to need badge boosts for the late game. It obviously doesn't make sense to delete Ice Beam before I face Erika, and Bubble Beam is my same type attack bonus move, which is shortly going to be replaced by Surf. So if I want to have Psychic on my set, the only choice I have to make is deleting Recover, which is what I do. Rival 4 is never a threat, but this is the first time Magnemite shows up on his team, and it's eventually going to become seriously awful. In the tower I have to face mandatory Chandlers, but with Psychic I can one-shot the Ghastly. It also helps against Jesse and James, who are generally just pushovers. They do some damage here because I'm not able to one-shot the Arbok or the Weezing, but still Staryu pulls through, levels up to 32, and here I can teach Swift. But once again my moveset is too constrained, so I don't have a place for it. I guess I'm just gonna have to say no. Cycling Road is a great opportunity for water types, well in this case a water type with a psychic type move, to train because there are a lot of poison and fighting types here. The poison types specifically have great experience yields, so I do some training, and after I defeat the final trainer, my Staryu is level 35. Okay, time to head into the Safari Zone, and with Starmie I did not teach it Surf in its final playthrough, because water type moves are just not very good against the Elite Four. With Staryu though, I think the situation is a little bit different, so I am going to teach Surf in the place of Bubble Beam, and now I can never unlearn this move. There's no move deleter in Generation 1. Next, I choose to go to Erika's gym, and I'm going to save right here. This is called the Drowsy save, because once I didn't do this save on stream, and it led to completely disastrous results. I'm sure you've seen it. Ice Beam is great throughout the gym, because I can just one-shot all the grass types, gaining a bunch of experience. And I am going to defeat the majority of the trainers here, just for levels. I don't want to go into the late game at a low level and then be walled by the Magneton, constantly spamming Thunder Wave and Thunderbolt. Okay, next is Erika. Let's do this. Tangela is up first, I go for Ice Beam, and I don't get the one-shot, but Mega Drain does only a third to me and then I finish it off. I am hoping that I one-shot the Weepinbell though, because it knows Sleep Powder. And Staryu doesn't have the damage required. Weepinbell goes for Razor Leaf, gets a critical hit, and that's a reset. Okay, even with Ice Beam, maybe fighting Erika right now is not a good choice. Instead, I'll head to Saffron City and complete a bunch of Sylph. There are optional trainers here, as well as additional vitamins and a rare candy. Plus, all of these trainers disappear once Giovanni is defeated, so I might as well fight them now. Typically, I like to fight the rival around level 40 with fully evolved Pokemon, sometimes a bit lower, 38, 35. In this case, I go a little bit higher, all the way to 41, and then I go back and face the rival for the first time. His first Pokemon is the other villain, Sandslash. In this case, I have Surf, so I can just one-shot it. It is never going to be an issue with a water type. Next is Magneton. Surf is still my best solution for it, but I'm gonna two-hit either way, so I go for Ice Beam just in case I get a freeze. There's a little bit more upside there. I don't, it uses Thunder Shock and gets a lucky 10% paralysis. This is gonna be Staryu's undoing. I have to tank a Thunder Shock as a result, and Surf does less than I was expecting. Magneton hangs on and uses Thunder Shock one more time, finishing me. Okay, so hopefully all of you can see why this thing is so awful. Something people are not aware of all the time is the fact that Magneton has a higher base special when compared with Jolteon. It also has a much higher defense stat, so it holds up against physical attacks better. That's not relevant in this case though, because I'm gonna have to knock it out with Surf. Fighting the rival right now probably doesn't make sense, so I dig out of Saffron City and head over to Koga's gym next. Here, I can do some additional training against Hamers for good experience yields to level Staryu up a little bit more before I take on Koga himself. Okay, this battle deserves a little bit of an explanation. Venonat 1 and Venonat 3 have Sleep Powder, a grass-type move. Because Koga has AI Modification 3, they are going to spam this against you until you have a status condition. You can sometimes play around this by getting poisoned on the juggler right before Koga, but that didn't happen for Staryu. Luckily for me, I can use Psychic, which is super effective against the Venonats, and I was hoping that I would one-shot all three. I actually don't. The third Venonat survives, but Koga just replaces his attack with X attack, so the Venonat doesn't do anything and I knock it out, moving on to his final Pokemon, the electric grass type Venomoth. Quick shout out here to J-Rose, who recently did a Venomoth playthrough, and I feel very honored that he named his player character after me, so thank you J-Rose, you were the inspiration for me starting my channel. It feels really cool to be included in your work. Luckily for me, this Venomoth doesn't really have any moves that are good against Staryu, unless it lowers my special with Psychic. That is frustrating. Now it's going to do more damage and I will do less. Well, I could get a critical hit, which is exactly what happens, and Venomoth faints. Okay, so a little bit of a lucky victory there for Staryu. I think that training to level 45 or 48 might be the ideal play to ensure that I one-shot the third Venonat. I won't spoil it now though, because we'll talk about this fight again during the second playthrough. With access to Surf outside of battle, I'm gonna head to Cinnabar Island next, because I can battle all the trainers in Blaine's gym for additional experience. This is also advantageous because the Volcano Badge boosts your special stat, and that's gonna help against Rival 5. Surprisingly, he's often an issue for water-type Pokemon. Really here, the fossils are the only ones that don't have issues. But I get lucky here, critting the Rapidash. The Arcanine is last. I go for Surf, it does more than half. Takedown doesn't do enough, and then I knock out his ace. Okay, back to Sylph to face the rival. One-shot the Sandslash. Now Magneton is going to be a two-hit. If I don't get a crit, and in this case I do. With the way cleared, Ninetales is easily a one-shot, and Kadabra takes 2 turns, but it just wastes its time with Disable. Last is Vaporeon, which is really not a good ace, definitely the rival's weakest final Pokemon, but this team makes up for that fact by having a Magneton. After Vaporeon goes down, I quickly clean up Giovanni, and that's that for Sylph. Still, there are things to do in Saffron City. I did not forget Sabrina this time. I talked to Copycat, get the TM for Mimic, which is likely going to be really important later on. With it in my bag, I go to the Saffron City gym to face Sabrina. Okay, this fight would be free if I had Swift on my moveset, but I don't want to unlearn any of my current moves. Psychic is going to be useful for one of the Elite Four members, Agatha, and Ice Beam is going to be useful for Lance. I would prefer not to have to teach Blizzard, even though it has 90% accuracy. The 10% chance to miss is just not good. Also, Kadabra using Kinesis is not good because now all of my attacks have a 66% chance to hit. With Alakazam's huge special stat, it can endlessly use Recover on me. Maybe I should be using Psychic here to drop its special stat, that would mean Staryu would take less damage. But I don't have a way to heal, and Psychic is doing too much, so I take a reset. And not just one, because sometimes the Kadabra is enough to defeat me. The play that I ended up deciding on is spamming Ice Beam against the Psychic types until I freeze them. This happens against the first Kadabra, so I'm able to dodge the use of Kinesis and move on to the Alakazam, which no longer has its signature move. Now if you look in the bottom left, I have +6 defense, which I set up against Kadabra after freezing it, because it couldn't defrost. This compounded to my special badge boosts, increasing Surf's damage, giving me a 2-shot against the final Psychic type. Now I said I didn't forget Sabrina, but I did forget Erika. I technically battled her before, but yeah, forgot her now, have to backtrack to that gym. Of course, Ice Beam just one-shots all of her Pokemon now that I'm so over-leveled. In the Viridian City gym, I fight some optional trainers so that I'm not going to level up in the middle of the battle against Giovanni. I don't want to lose my badge boosts. His first Pokemon is Dugtrio. I just go for Surf. Maybe I won't actually have to badge boost here. He's kind of bad. Persian goes down to a critical hit from Surf. I continue my spree against the Nidoqueen and the following Nidoking. Actually, just barely not. It survives on a sliver of health, likely because its special stat is slightly higher than Nidoqueen's. This gives it a chance to use Thunder, which deals massive damage. Okay, maybe one badge boost would be ideal here. Luckily, Staryu survives. I hit with Surf, move on to the Rhydon, and it is a foregone conclusion. Rival 6, once again, I have to fight the Magneton. This time, I decided to set up on the Sandslash. It ends up being a mistake because then it uses Slash, gets a critical hit, and does half damage to Staryu. From there, things are easier. I one-shot it and the following Execute, but then Magneton comes in, and this is where things get difficult. In this battle, I'm going to mention how its AI works. So it's always going to be choosing electric moves against water-type Pokemon. In this case, randomizing between Thundershock and Thunder Wave. If it goes for the status move first, then it will lower my speed, using Thundershock on the next turn because I have a status condition. But if it goes for Thundershock, then it's just going to do damage. So unless I one-hit it, it will always deal damage with at least one move. The worst case scenario is you get paralyzed and it deals damage. The better case scenario is it just uses Thundershock, which is what happens here. But I'm left on red health for the rest of the battle. Ninetales uses Quick Attack, chipping me down to 13 hit points, and then Kadabra comes in and Surf is not able to one-hit. Psybeam wins the battle for the rival. The Slash on turn 1 from the Sandslash was pretty lucky for him. Sometimes he'll use other bad moves like Fury Swipe, Swift, or Poison Sting, all which don't do much damage when I'm setting up with Harden. I go all the way to +4 before the Sandslash poisons me, and then I decided to sweep. Now with my boosted special, Surf can one-hit the Magneton, which is very encouraging. Ninetales goes down, Kadabra doesn't go down to a Surf, but Psybeam doesn't do much. With that, I make it to Vaporeon, and it's kind of scary because its special is so high and its HP, meaning I do very little damage every turn, taking poison damage in return, even when it just chooses to waste its time with moves like Acid Armor. But the rival isn't able to buy enough time, and Staryu is victorious. Okay, Victory Road, the last opportunity for me to train before the league. I decided to skip all of the trainers here. I think level 52 is enough, but I am going to do one more act, going to the power plant, picking up the final 12th rare candy. Having access to all of these is especially useful when you're a slow growth rate, a first stage Pokemon, and you're relying on badge boosts. I use a total of 8, bringing Staryu up from 52 to 60, and I'm saving the rest just so I can use them before battles to ensure that I don't have a mid-battle level up, which would destroy all of my efforts to raise my stats with badge boosts. Okay, there's one last thing to do. I did say I wanted Ice Beam for Lance, but teaching Thunderbolt in its place just makes more sense for Lorelei. This fight against Lorelei is the first time that I'm going to mention the 4th success factor for water-type Pokemon, and that is access to a move that allows them to badge boost or increase their stats. Poliwag gets access to Amnesia, which obviously sets it apart from the others. Pokemon like Squirtle get access to Withdraw, which is basically the same as Staryu's Harden. I set it up here against the Dugong while it snoozes due to rest. That increases my stats, making the Cloyster a one-shot with Thunderbolt. Badge boosts here are also important for Staryu because I am not able to have Mimic on my stat to steal the Slowbro's Amnesia. Sometimes this is a strategy that I can use to make the Jinx and the Lapras a little bit easier, but without it I have to rely on Surf for Jinx. It almost gets the one hit, luckily triggering a Super Potion so she doesn't attack, and I knock it out. Last is Lapras. Thunderbolt takes it to orange health. It uses Confuse Ray, Staryu doesn't hit itself, and Lorelei is defeated. Honestly, a pretty easy first member of the Elite Four. Now the second member of the Elite Four is after I proceed through this chamber. This guy is just a hiker. He's got a terrible Onix. I have Psychic for all all of his fighting type Pokemon, and by the time I knock out the second Onix, I am at full health against his Machamp. What could possibly happen here? I use Psychic, it does massive damage, Machamp survives on red hit points, and I also get a special drop, which is just adding insult to injury. Then Machamp uses Submission, its only same type attack bonus move, which it typically doesn't choose. In this case, it gets a critical hit, doing massive damage to Staryu. Yeah, I lose. I actually lost to Bruno with Staryu. What happens in the next fight is much more typical. Bruno chooses an X-Defend, which does nothing, and then I knock out the Machamp with Psychic. Okay, today, Agatha, you are the third member of the Elite Four. That very rarely happens. Things don't start well against her. Because I have Surf, I have no move slot for Mimic, meaning I can't steal Substitute, and because of that, Lick can inflict its secondary status condition. Staryu gets paralyzed, and from there I didn't feel comfortable continuing the battle. It's just gonna waste more time than it's worth. The next attempt, I start things off getting lucky with a critical hit on the Gengar, knocking it out in one turn. The Golbat takes 2 hits to finish, but it just uses a useless wing attack. Then, the Haunter doesn't go down, but she uses a Super Potion, so that's another free Ghost. Arbok faints to a single hit, and that leaves only one Gengar, which just chooses Dream Eater. Agatha completely threw that second fight. I haven't had to manipulate my experience to avoid badge boosts expiring during the middle of battles, so I have 4 rare candies left over before Lance. Might as well use these, bringing Staryu up to level 65. And of course I'm also going to teach Blizzard in the place of Psychic because it's really not that good against the champion and he's the only remaining trainer. I've held on to Thunderbolt so I can one-shot the Gyarados, and from there I can use Blizzard on the 2 Dragonairs, Surf on the Aerodactyl for higher accuracy, and finally Blizzard, which of course misses on the Dragonite. It uses Thunder, dealing massive damage to Staryu. Luckily I survive and it doesn't paralyze. This allows me to try Blizzard one more time, it hits, and Lance is defeated. I saved 1 rare candy, I'll use it now, and then I'll take on the champion. Going into this fight, I am really trying to make Ike the Killer proud because I don't want to use Rest if possible. I figured I could set up with Harden against the Sandslash, boosting my special attack enough to one-shot everything else, and I could keep Thunderbolt on my set for the Vaporeon to make it a little bit faster. Turns out this is not the best idea for Staryu. I get hit by a critical hit from Slash, and get poisoned by Poison Sting before I knock out the Sandslash, and now I only have +3 in my defense. This hasn't let my badge boosts compound very much, so I can't even two-shot the Alakazam. It ends up taking 3 hits in total because it chooses 1 recover. Then against the Executor, things get even worse. It survives a Blizzard, I take poison damage, and it establishes Leech Seed. While Ninetales is a one-hit with Surf, and it luckily doesn't choose Quick Attack, the following Magneton, which I've been mentioning this whole video, survives, goes for Thunderbolt, and of course that's that. Time to use Rest. We're going to teach it to Staryu in the place of Thunderbolt, and the Vaporeon's just going to be annoying to knock out with Surf. If I have Rest, then I can heal against the Sandslash after taking massive damage or becoming poisoned. What this strategy doesn't make me immune to are critical hits, which happen here. I didn't judge my health well enough, and Slash knocks Staryu out. But now I know that every time I go under 71 hit points I should heal, so at 67 I use Rest, healing up. The Sandslash just wastes its time with 2 Poison Stings and 1 not very good Earthquake. I continue my setup, get to +6, and then I knock it out. My badge boosts show off the power of compound growth. I one-shot the Alakazam with Surf. Blizzard knocks out the Executor. The Ninetales quick attacks, but it doesn't matter. Surf takes care of it. And against Magneton, I cross my fingers hoping for the one-shot. And yeah, of course I don't get it. I crit in this case. So that is what caused Staryu to deal less damage. The villain uses Thunderbolt, and it does so much. And Staryu survives with 6 hit points. Surf connects again, and I knock out the electric type. Okay, I am so glad I have Rest on my set. I can now heal up. Well, actually, the Vaporeon goes for Quick Attack. But you know, Harden, it's a good move. I survive on 1 hit point. Use Rest. Staryu replenishes all of its hit points. And because of type effectiveness, the Vaporeon is only using Quick Attack. As a result, I can slowly chip it down with Surf. It takes a while, but eventually the champion is defeated. Staryu gets a first playthrough time of 1 hour 25 minutes and 28 seconds, with 11 resets, 7 blackouts at level 66, with a game time of 5 hours and 18 minutes. Okay, this is a fine first playthrough result, but anything that's over an hour in Pokemon Yellow is pretty slow. Staryu is definitely going to be able to get this time under the 1 hour and 20 minute mark, but there remains the question if it's going to sneak in under 1 hour and 15 minutes. Remember when I said I couldn't extend my training against the Light Years Junior trainer doing more blackouts because I don't don't have a status move. That's not entirely true. Instead, I am going to fight Pokemon on Route 1, something I very rarely do because their experience yields aren't great. My goal is to get to level 7 before I make it to the mandatory bug catcher in Viridian Forest. Then with some degree of luck, I will be able to defeat his Caterpie and make it to Pewter City at a lower level. That means I can fight the Light Years Junior trainer for a longer period of time, taking more trainer-based experience from the Diglett, which will speed up my Brock split. This does of course increase the number of blackouts that I have in total in this playthrough by 2 all the way up to 9. And in the former playthrough I had one unintentional blackout, so there was really only 6 blackouts here, so I was able to increase the amount of time that I trained here by 50%. The next question you'll have about the early game is, do I go back and fight the rival on Route 22 because this time I beat the rival in the lab? And the answer is no, I am going to fight the Magneton. Success factor 4, badge boosts means that I can use Surf to one-shot it. Without setup though, using a Pokemon like Seal, things would be much different. This time I get to level 17 and learn Water Gun at 20 minutes and 4 seconds. That's 3 minutes and 10 seconds faster than my previous attempt, so major improvement in the early game, even though the Brock split is still over the 20-minute mark. As I head out onto Route 3, you'll wonder about my damage ranges against Brock, say at level 16 with Tackle. Here they are, it's just not gonna work. It makes sense to take the time and train up to level 17. Okay, so on Route 3 I fought the Bug Catcher who has 4 Pokemon instead of the last for additional experience. This is because inside Mount Moon I'm gonna battle so many optional trainers. This Rocket with Sandshrew that I never fight, the Super Nerd, the Bug Catcher, the other Rocket who's guarding the Ether, the Youngster, the Hiker, the third Rocket, and then the 2 mandatory trainers before Cerulean City. This way, once I defeat the Junior Trainer and the Swimmer, I don't need to backtrack and fight a wild Pokemon. Instead, I'll just be level 22 here, and I'll gain Harden for Misty. The only loss condition here is if the Starmie gets a ridiculous number of critical hits. It doesn't happen here, so still no resets for Staryu. On the SSN, I don't take extra time training, but I do things in a different order, fighting the guy with the Growlithe first, so I don't have to backtrack to him later. Plus then, when I'm fighting the rival, I level up to 27 and learn Recover. I don't have enough speed to move first against the Raichu, so there is the possibility for a reset here. It's annoying, but in this case I don't, so Surge is pathetic as usual. An alternate scenario plays out here with the Wrapping Last. Sometimes the Oddish won't use Stun Spore, instead going for Poison Powder, and this is the ideal circumstance. While it makes Wrap deal more damage per hit, this doesn't matter because I'm outspeeding her Pokemon, so I always get a chance to move, and since I'm not using Rest, I'm never going to remove the status condition, meaning she can never paralyze me and cut my speed. This ends up being a major advantage, and I finish the fight in less than half of the time it took me previously. Throughout the mid-game, I play things almost identically. My moveset ends up being Psychic, Ice Beam, Harden, and Surf, which is the same as before. Although, I am not going to complete Sylph by fighting the rival and losing and then having to backtrack. Instead, I do training here, then I intentionally dig out and go to Erika's gym at level 40. At this level, I'm able to one-shot the Tangela, the Weepinbell, and the Gloom, so this is just experience that is going to help me out towards my next goal, which is facing Koga. I previously said maybe level 45 or 48 would be more optimal, but it just isn't. The problem here is that it's just going to take far too long to level up because there aren't any experience-rich trainers left in the region. In order to fight the people I would really want to gain experience on, I need access to Surf, and I have to defeat Koga for that. At level 43, the damage ranges are decent. 100% on the first Venonat, 82.9 on the second Venonat, and 46.4 on the third one. In this case, I get the lucky damage roll, move on to the Venomoth, and here I am going to 3-shot. Unless I get a special drop, which is what happens right away, Venomoth doesn't attack because of an X attack, and so that's a free win essentially for me. I fight all the trainers in Blaine's gym, I smash him. He was a little bit scarier this time, but I still don't have a reset. With my special badge boost, I head back, face the rival in Sylph, and here you'll notice something. I beat the rival in the lab, so now he has the Flareon team. This means his water type is not Vaporeon, it is instead Cloyster. In some ways this makes the battle a little bit worse, and in other ways it makes it easier. The Cloyster only knows Supersonic, and you can usually set up with Harden or Withdraw against it and just stall out the confusion counter. I didn't choose to set up though because the Magneton doesn't have Thunder Wave, and I know it can survive at least 1 Thunder Shock and 2 hit with Surf. Surf 2 hits the following Kadabra, and 1-shots the final Flareon. Okay, Sabrina, I do need to address this one. If I was using Swift, I could stack badge boosts using Harden and Flash on the Abra and then sweep her team for free. I didn't want to do this for one reason. The rival on Route 22 has an Execute, and I want to be able to one-shot it with Ice Beam. If I'm not able to one-shot it, then it will use Stun Spore, making the Magneton far more difficult. Probably the Kadabra or the Flareon will eventually knock me out. I played around with the idea of of setting up Harden fully on the Sand Slash at the beginning of the fight, but even with +6, Surf and Psychic do not get one-shots against the Execute, so the situation remains the same. If I didn't learn Surf, then I could teach Swift in its place, but it would slow down the mid-game training. And that's definitely not the ideal thing to do, because Staryu needs to do a decent amount of it since it's a slow growth rate Pokemon. The consequence of this situation is that Sabrina is a little bit more difficult. I get hit by Kinesis here, miss a bunch, and then the Kadabra crits me, giving me my first reset. Frustrating, but I win on the next attempt, so it's not the end of the world. With one turn of setup on Giovanni's Persian, I am able to one-hit the Nidoqueen consistently, and I have a 93.6% chance to one-hit the Nidoking. This means there's less of a risk to a Thunder critical hit or paralysis. For the rival, the strategy is fairly straightforward. I harden once, one-shot the Sandslash and the Execute, then on the Cloyster it's just going to spam Supersonic again, so I can complete my setup here, not having to do it against the Sandslash with the high critical hit move Slash. Every time I increase my defensive stats, I do less damage to myself because my attack stat is used in this calculation. Eventually, Psychic 2 hits the Cloyster, and then Surf can one-hit the Magneton. I'm also very fast now, so both Kadabra and Flareon aren't threats. Before Lorelei, I'm going to change up how I use my rare candies. Instead of a total of 8 here, I'm only going to use 6. This is so I can be one level higher at the end of the playthrough, which is critical for damage ranges against the champion. Now, this next fight is one that's really unfortunate. I get very unlucky against Lorelei critting the Dugong. I wanted to set up against it when it uses Rest so that I have the damage I need to knock out her later Pokemon, which are more of a threat. Jinx has Lovely Kiss, Lapras has Confuse Ray, and Body Slam. In this case, I decided to try to set up against the Slowbro, hoping it would just spam Amnesia a bunch, but then it goes for Psychic twice and knocks Staryu out, giving me my second reset. When I don't crit Dugong, this battle isn't a problem. Okay, Bruno, I make it back to the Machamp. I was a little bit scared, but don't worry, this time it goes for Karate Chop, which does crit, but it doesn't do enough damage. Agatha's next, and this fight does end up being a little bit rough. Because I'm not running Mimic, I don't have Substitute, and so this time Confuse Ray gets me on the final Gengar, but in the second fight against her, while I do get paralyzed by the Arbok, it doesn't end in a loss. This is one consequence of using less rare candies. These fights are just a little bit more difficult, but as you can see here, before I defeat her, I level up to 60, and the final Gengar provides even a little bit more experience beyond that. This way, when I take out Lance's final Pokemon, I level up to 61. Now, I can use my 6 remaining rare candies to go up to 67, instead of 66. This doesn't make a huge difference in the final fight, but I figured the risk was worth it. Lorelei shouldn't be more difficult, the crit was the reason I fell apart there, and Agatha is always going to be some level of risky. Having one extra level here improves my damage range against the Alakazam by about 8%. I get a slightly better damage range against the Executor, but it's less than 1%, so it's not really statistically relevant. The Magneton, on the other hand, is also an 8% improvement, so now Surf has an 88.2% chance to knock it out. Now, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the champion's actually really difficult with Staryu. If I want to be able to one-hit the Alakazam, and I do, so that I don't take a Psychic that lowers my special, a Kinesis that lowers my accuracy, or a Psybeam that confuses me, I want to set up against the Sandslash. This front loads all potential risk in the battle, hopefully making each reset as fast as possible if I get unlucky. And I get unlucky, really unlucky. In the first battle, the Sandslash crits with Fury Swipes of all moves, gets enough hits, and knocks Staryu out. In the second battle, it once again crits with Fury Swipes and then follows it up with a Slash. Sometimes it just spams Slash and Earthquake. Other times it just crits right away with Earthquake. Genuinely not a very good showing here from a luck perspective, but this is my strategy. I'm gonna play it out. Once I get set up, then I have a 49% chance to one-hit the Alakazam, a 90% chance to one-hit the Executor, and an 88% chance, as I said before, to one-hit the Magneton. I successfully get it against this Pokemon, move on to the Cloyster. I have to two-hit here, but Spike Cannon can't do much to me because of my defense stat. Flareon is a one-shot, and Staryu clocks in with its follow-up playthrough time. 1 hour, 16 minutes, and 41 seconds, with 7 resets, 9 blackouts at level 67, with a game time of 4 hours and 48 minutes. This is 8 minutes and 47 seconds faster than my first playthrough. I was able to get Staryu under 1 hour and 20 minutes, but not under 1 hour and 15. Still, I now know that it is possible. I just have to get a little bit luckier against the champion. Now, we need to rank Staryu in the tier list. I'm going to show you these Professor Oak battles, which is a fun thing that I like to do at the end of all of my yellow videos in case you haven't stayed till the the very end in the past. While we're watching this footage play out, I just want to say thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon or through YouTube memberships. It really does mean the world to me. So my strategy here against Oak is fairly simple. I can set up badge boosts against the Tauros because it has Leer and Tail Whip, both which also badge boost me and counter out my Hardens, allowing me to continuously set up. Sometimes this means I can get all the way to 999 in every one of my stats, but Tauros doesn't give me the opportunity today because it starts using Rage. I finish my setup on the Executor, use Blizzard, knocking it out over 2 turns, then I one-shot the Arcanine and go up against the Blastoise. By the way, I'm fighting it instead of the Venusaur because it resists my attacks, whereas the Venusaur takes super effective damage from Blizzard. I make it past the Blastoise, and I was fairly sure I was just about to win, but then the Gyarados lowers my defense, goes for Hyper Beam, gets a critical hit, and knocks Staryu out. I come back into the fight, defeat the Blastoise again, and this time when the Gyarados doesn't get lucky, I go for Blizzard, it does more than half, and then I knock out his ace on the next turn. So, Oak's taken care of, now let's rank Staryu. With its current time under an hour and 25 minutes, it earns itself a spot in the F tier, just behind Aerodactyl and ahead of Doduo. Highlighting all of the first stage water type Pokemon, let's do a quick analysis. Staryu ends up underperforming Tentacool and Kabuto. Wrap really lets Tentacool set itself apart, plus Barrier is a better setup move when you want to resist physical damage. Horsea struggles with all the grass types in the mid game, and Recover helps Staryu there. Goldeen has Peck at the beginning, which is just not very good. I get Water Gun at least at level 17, but Goldeen has to defeat Brock with physical moves. Seal is one of my least favorite Pokemon, and Shelter has a slow growth rate. And speaking of growth rates, I do think that Staryu outperformed its slow growth rate, largely due to the fact that its move pool is so fantastic. If it didn't have access to moves like Thunderbolt and Psychic, I think it would have been destined for the Surge tier. I have one last thing to say, and it is really important. This video represents a major milestone in my tier list's history. Today, I have finally hit 3 digits. I have now ranked 100 out of 151 Pokemon. And by the end of 2025, this tier list will be complete. Now, if you've made it this far, you're incredible. I'll see you in my next video.